Hello, welcome to my new channel. It's called the Contrarian Gazette. It's primarily going to be a sort of debunking channel, similar to something like Snopes, hopefully. It's run by primarily one person, me. I have a couple other YouTube channels that I've made. A couple of them are fairly successful, but I don't actually want to reveal those channels because I want to try something new and grow a different kind of audience. Something that's less about the kinds of things I was doing in my other channels and more about what it really means to be a contrarian. Because in my observations, uh, uh, contrarians have kind of gotten a bad rap recently. If you look it up on Wikipedia, contrarian is often associated with something like a flat earther, climate change deniers, anti-vaxxers, and a whole host of other kinds of denials of science and reason that really give the idea of a contrarian a bad name. And when I say contrarian, I mean taking some sort of stance against some kind of given claim or evidence for something. So, to me, it is kind of odd that people associate contrarianism with pseudoscience, because contrarianism in and of itself isn't a form of, or it's not a belief system, but more a method of evaluating belief systems. It's a very logical approach to evaluating arguments, and this channel is ultimately one giant argument for that. But I will use many different examples, and hopefully through multiple videos and multiple arguments you will start to see the algorithmic approach that a contrarian takes and why they take it, because it creates a very efficient way of evaluating arguments, claims of evidence, and all different kinds of things that you would use some kind of logical structure to make a case for something. So I think that showing why a contrarian is valuable in discourse is a good way to clear the air on why people see contrarians as pseudoscientists, essentially, because they see contrarianism as a flat denial of what is in front of them and some sort of paradoxical line of thought where it's just an infinite chain of denials, and wherever the denials stop is where the contrarian fills in the blanks with their arguments. But that's not really what contrarianism is. That's kind of a distortion, and hopefully this channel will break that. So those are really my goals for the channel. I'm not planning on doing a Patreon or anything like that anytime soon. No sponsorships. The whole point of being a contrarian is to have an objective viewpoint on separate topics and to not interweave these viewpoints into some narrative or some kind of grand paradigm. So I'm going to try my best to not garner a specific demographic that's paying or any kind of influence on why I'm doing what I'm doing, to keep it as objective as possible. So if you do enjoy this content, the most I would ever ask from you is to leave feedback in the comments, like the video if it's particularly good, and subscribe. And if you really wanted to go the extra mile, at some point I'll probably have a subreddit or a Twitter, maybe an Instagram, various things like that, promoting videos and hinting and taking surveys and things like that. So if you really want to go full on with the support, which I don't expect from anyone at this point, that's how you can do that. And I'll be providing links for all those things as videos roll out. And I don't plan on having videos roll out very frequently, maybe once or twice a week at the very most. At the beginning, I have jobs, more than one, and I've got an entire life. And hopefully this will be some sort of anonymous side project to sharpen my critical thinking skills and hopefully help other people along their way with that same quest. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and walk through the topic of the video. So, what does it really mean to be a contrarian? Well, in a sort of very literal sense, it means to seek the first case of evidence against something and use that as a beginning of your counter-argument. So the way it basically works from a logical standpoint is, let's say you have an argument. The argument could be something like, the sky is blue. So we're having an argument for a thing which we can call A, and A would be simply the sky is blue. So the argument is A is true, and A being the sky is blue. So the sky is blue. That is a true statement, and that would be a claim. So if you wanted to do some kind of logical analysis of that claim, what you would do is you would break it down like I did to this logical structure where we're looking for a case of A, or the claim is that A is true. So what we have to do is break down the logical implications of A, which is that the sky is blue, and we would, using the Contrarian method, look for any example that disproves that A is true. So we're looking for the sky is blue, and that would be true. That's the claim. So to break that down, we would find an example of how the sky isn't blue. And at the first chance that you do find that, you would make the claim that A is not true because the sky is not always blue. So it can break down into semantics a bit, but that's kind of an important thing to go through so that you can flesh out all the possible cases, and you can find exclusions to the rule that either break it or bolster it. And let's say you're trying to find evidence that A is not true, which would be that the sky is not blue or not always blue, and if you can't find evidence of that, then you will reinforce why not. You will end up with your own kind of postulated theory on why you can't find a counterexample, which will bolster the original argument at that point. So the benefits of using this form of skepticism or logical evaluation is that it's very algorithmic and somewhat efficient. So you don't have to do quite a lot of thinking for yourself and forming complicated counter arguments. You can really just take like a algorithmic approach to scanning the logical structure of an argument and looking for disproven cases. And the interesting thing about this is that when you have a case like this where someone is saying this is true and it kind of assumes that it means in all cases. So if you can find simply one where this isn't the case, or where the sky isn't blue, then the sky would be whatever color it was, and that would be true. So let's say you have a picture of a green sky or a purple and pink sky, which you do see a lot in the twilight hours of dusk, and you could show that and say, well, here there is no blue in the sky, or it's not all blue, even if it's just a tiny fraction of a different color that is on a light spectrum that is distant from blue, or is shown to have some evidence of not being blue. Well, then you can say that the sky isn't blue because it's not always blue. And even though that sounds like a semantic breakdown, in this case it is kind of silly, but in very large arguments these kinds of things can become very important, because when you have a large argument you have logical premise after logical premise, sort of like a stack of them that are all separated in a line and they all feed into each other, and it can be really hard to break down an argument that's formed like that. But with this type of Contrarian method, you could kind of scan each logical premise for its validity and find cracks in them, and not necessarily completely destroy the entire argument, but you can destroy these presuppositions that can take the later implications into question. Like if someone has an argument that's heavily predicated on the fact that the sky is blue always, and you can prove that the sky is not always blue, just in that really simple semantic case, you've already cracked the base of their entire argument. So for very little work and creative thinking, you can get a lot of output in the critical thinking realm just by this very mathematical, logical approach to the structure of someone's argument. And for that reason, it's often seen as like a path of least resistance to either debolster. A contrarian method of evaluation is often a path of least resistance to either bolster or debunk any given evidence for a claim or any given argument. And the reason why this is because, like I said earlier, counter examples are more efficient mathematically. When someone has a claim that something is true, you are only required really only one counter example to start to remove validity in a way that's meaningful and is not just semantic. Even though your method may be semantic in approach, the outcome is solid evidence refuting claims. And without the absence of counterexamples, you can create a proof as to why one is impossible, which again can go back to, help the original argument. And the point of doing this contrarian method is not to disprove or to win, it's to check. It's a validation technique. So doing this is a good thing, even if you might want to disprove something or you go in hoping to. You have to realize that if you can't find counterexamples, you need to find out why you can't, and you have to find, and that will eventually create another logical basis for the argument. So you are either destroying or helping inadvertently. And this isn't about intention. Like, you shouldn't have any intention when you use this method, because then you get problems with confirmation bias and it just becomes really messy when you're trying to remain objective. And that when you find these kinds of arguments, this method is usually found in mathematics textbooks. Specifically, the best example is a textbook called Concrete Mathematics, A Foundation of Computer Science, in the second edition. And any kind of mathematical foundation of information science class will emphasize this point quite a bit. Anything that involves with proofs, critical argumentation, reasoning, this method is usually taught in some form or fashion because it is a great way to check the claims that are in front of you. And that leads into the whole political side of contrarianism, which is when you see something worth opposing, whether it be an action or belief or a political system, a contrarian is a good way to spread skepticism and cynicism about that action or belief or political system by always having a firm, skeptical, cynical, doubting stance and never having any faith or trust in what's being told to you. You can convey the tone of, just general distrust, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. It can help bolster your argument if people are skeptical but they don't know. To see other skeptics questioning things can help, especially you see that a lot in atheism, where you'll have atheists out loudly talking and saying what they think, and Christians will quietly speak to them and question them very open-mindedly, and they are questioning their beliefs quite a bit, but they don't know how to do that in their own social setting. So to see a contrarian atheist is a good thing to them, because it reaffirms what they're feeling inside, and it helps them realize that they're not just illogical or unfaithful or sinful to question absurd claims without any evidence and requirements of retiring your critical faculties to, just people who live down the road who are from the area, just locals. So those are really my basic arguments, is that, the contrarian skepticism is a great starting viewpoint for evaluating evidence based on this kind of mathematical structure of how contrarianism works. Or at least I see a big correlation between this mathematical method of evaluating arguments and a contrarian viewpoint. And now that's to say, not the typical contrarian viewpoint that most people think of, which would be, a flat earther, an anti-vaxxer, a person who simply just denies evidence no matter what, in some sort of paradoxical infinite feedback loop of denials of evidence, and then taking what's left after you've made 20 denials about how the earth is round and using what they haven't proven to fill in the gaps about how the earth is flat. That's not contrarianism. That's something else altogether, and it shouldn't be called contrarianism. And hopefully I can show you guys that contrarianism is really a form of fact-checking and not so much a belief system in and of itself. And that's because the simplest way to disprove something is to find cases where the logical implications of the argument are not possible with the outcomes you found. That being the most basic toy example, the claim of the sky being blue and you finding pictures of a purple sky or a pink sky. That means the sky is not blue. And we know the sky isn't blue because color is really just a perception of wavelength of light, and all that's really going on is gases are combusting in the atmosphere as the light passes through it, and it distorts the wavelength, and the atmosphere does so too, and that's why we see color. And really, color doesn't even actually exist. It's just it's a latent dysfunction of our perception, essentially. So you can take these simple counterexamples and attack the base of an argument. And the Contrarian method is the quickest way to find these counterexamples, because you're isolating the logical structure of an argument, and that really helps you break down what people are saying and implying, but without taking the tidbits of trivia into account. You can examine the logical structure of an argument for the state of Israel having walls all around their borders without taking into account the historical context, because you're just examining the logical merit of the argument. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take in historical context, because you absolutely should when you do make big decisions. I'm not trying to make a type of argument where you can simply rely on logical evaluation of arguments to guide you through your critical thinking process. You should have just as much of a logical as an ethical and emotional basis. You need to make sure you're minimizing suffering for everyone with all of these decisions. We're all actively seeking to find out what's right here, ideally. The truth is what's most important. And some of you might be saying, why does this matter? And it matters because the way you parse through information on a daily basis has a really big effect on your belief systems and your values. And with a contrarian point of view, it will be a lot easier to evaluate the things both that you think and that others think. And without one, it's simply going to be a less efficient process of evaluating arguments and finding out what's true and false, at least in a logical perspective. because you'll be, without always taking this doubtful, seeking out counterexamples first point of view, you're prone to confirmation bias, and you'll gloss over things that shouldn't be glossed over because they sound good to you. And if you just use this contrarian method, that basically can't happen, because it doesn't matter what argument is being put in front of you. The emotional aspects of the argument, the ethical aspects of the argument, they are simply not being taken into account in this contrarian method. You isolate the logical structure of the argument and find inconsistencies in the logical structure, because this is a quick way of finding cracks in logic that can ripple out into bad decisions but are cloaked by a very good emotional argument or a very good ethical one. You know, someone can make a great utilitarian case for internment camps of the Japanese, but when you break down the logical inconsistency of believing in the pursuit of freedom but also believing in taking it from people who you deem to be not the most trustworthy in any respect, is just a complete break in logic. And once you can do things like that, you can start to bring that break in logic over to an ethical break and an emotional break, and you can start to like come across many different kinds of fallacies just by starting with the logical structure of the argument. And so if you're not doing that, then it can just take longer, or you can just be less accurate when you're evaluating people and their arguments. So it's really important to do that, because it's an unbiased way of checking the validity of people's logical arguments, and that's very important in today's age when you have stuff like Trump and people like Jimmy Dore and people who make these intense emotional claims about past grievances and the ethical implications, and they blur the line of what's right and what's wrong from a logical standpoint. It turns into whataboutisms. It turns into who's done worse, and whoever's done the worst thing is the worst, and that leaves everyone else in the clear, even though they might be a close second. You know, there's many implications when you decide right and wrong purely based on emotional and ethical standards. You need a logical standard for what you deem to be true, because true things are logically consistent, you know, and untrue things can appear logically consistent at the end, but they're not always logically consistent all the way through. And without this contrarian method, you won't look all the way through the logical structure. You'll be caught up in the emotional moment or the ethical implications, and that's just not efficient. And hopefully this video will help you guys see that a little bit. Alright, so I've made my case. I'd like to hear what you guys think now. Please leave a comment. You know, tell me what you thought. I'm sure there's going to be disagreements, and I'd love to hear them, honestly. Not like just to grow a channel. This isn't just some ploy. Like, I'd actually like to hear what you guys think. Like, I want this channel to be something with like legitimate discourse, not, you know, piss match, insults, none of that kind of stuff. No pandering. I want this to be something where people can take a honest stance and get honest critical thinking. And if you want that kind of thing on YouTube more and more, please show some support. Like the video, subscribe. I'm not going to ask you for any money or to buy any shitty t-shirts that are made in sweatshops. I'm not going to sponsor products that have very dubious terms and conditions that remove all their responsibility while making claims about helping you with mental health or with jobs or growing your channel. I'm not gonna sell you a fleshlight or anything like that. All I would hope for is, like and subscribe, comment, and watch my videos in the future. Thanks for all the support. I hope this video goes well. If there's any technical problems, please let me know, and I'll try to work on them for the future, and hopefully, possibly even re-upload the video with the technical problem solved. So, it was fun making this video, and I hope to hear from you and talk about this and more things in the future. Again, thank you for sticking to the video this long, although you probably didn't, since, I'm a piece of shit. Have a good day, Auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, Ferry, point soirée, bon appetit.